This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
While Paul and George had their working-class credentials in a period of the 1960s when being working-class was deemed sexy, Pete and John, with their background in comfortable suburbanite homes, seemed too alike. But there were other reasons. Pete, although quiet, was not soft. He boxed for his school, and he could handle himself. While John definitely saw Paul and George as junior partners in the band, Pete, though considered a passive outsider, would still be prepared to stand up to John. This uncertainty for John, together with Pete's background, would ultimately lead to the decision that Pete was out and Ringo was in. "We were cowards when we sacked him," John told Hunter Davis. "We made Brian do it, but if we'd told Pete to his face, that would have been much nastier than getting Brian to do it. It probably would have ended in a fight if we'd told him." John's conscience eventually got the better of him when he confided to Bill Harry that the way Pete was treated was despicable. As the Beatles began to accept Brian's style of management, John's relationship with him developed into one of both tormentor and confidant. Indeed, long before Brian became manager, John was bigoted towards homosexuals. "My God," Bob Wooler recalls, "how he ranted about fucking queers and fucking fags. He was very outspoken, indifferent to anyone's feelings. He didn't give a shite about anyone, really. He was especially intolerant of gays." Almost from the start, John had a fraught relationship with Brian. Minor jokes developed into stronger jibes, and these continued into outright insults, which soon became accepted and then normalized. Being both Jewish and gay, Brian suffered doubly from John's prejudices. Not long after Brian took over the Beatles, he gave a press conference in the Blue Angel Club in Liverpool, and while Paul was upstairs in the club, downstairs was a drunken John. Bob Wooler recalls that John was shouting his mouth off, well away with drink or whatever. He said, "Hitler should have finished the job," meaning that the gas ovens should have been more active than they were. Why Brian should allow incidents like this to slide is uncertain. Perhaps Brian was the first to realize the huge financial gains possible from the group's continued success. Perhaps he had already begun to develop a taste for the cut and thrust, the adrenaline rush of a show business lifestyle. For one, or all of these reasons, Brian evidently felt that John's infantile insults were worth the price he had to pay to be with the Beatles. The pressure of managing what would become the biggest musical act in the world resulted in the development of temper tantrums by Brian to his staff. The stresses and strains of this position not being helped by the constant jibes by John. Yet whereas John viewed these bouts of temper as a laughable sign of weakness, his own uncontrollable rages against others was seen by him as an indication of masculine virility. It seems that John's homophobic attitude was slow to lose itself. 10 years later in Jan Wenner's Rolling Stone interview, he declared, "I think Mick Jagger's a joke with all that fag dancing. I always did." John was, without a shadow of doubt, the leader. In the group's first radio interview for a local hospital station, the Cleaver and Clatterbridge interviewer Monty Lister made a mistake in asking George, "By playing lead guitar, does that mean that you're the leader of the group?" George, seemingly embarrassed, blurts out, No, just, well, you see, the other guitar is rhythm, ching, 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 you see." Paul realized that the radio-listening audience still didn't know who the leader is. What they did know was that the rhythm guitar player, John, was the one who had been given the task of making a ching, ching, ching sound on stage. Paul quickly steps in and emphatically declares that
John is in fact leader of the group,